My name is Khalil.
Admittedly.
Hello, my name is SOM Singh. I'm the National Study Coordinator of the Rugby Research and Injury Prevention Group affiliated with the Hospital of Special Surgery located in New York City, New York. I'm also a medical student at the University of Missouri, Kansas City School of Medicine. Today I will be presenting our group's work titled The Financial Burden of Sports Injuries in Women's U.S. Rugby-7s Regional Tournaments over 5 years. Before I begin, I would like to thank the Greater New York City area chapter of the American College of Sports Medicine for allowing our team to present our work today. Now, to begin, let me give you a little context about our research and our work at RRIPG, the Rugby Research Injury Prevention Group. We focus on looking into our namesake sport. Rugby is a growing collision sport that has grown in popularity and participation since its inclusion in 2016 to the Olympics. This was announced actually in 2012. Now, with this increased participation, there's also been a notable risk of injury occurring in rugby, given the contact nature of the sport. Therefore, the goal of our group and groups worldwide is to monitor and survey these injuries to detect potential patterns in order to prevent the welfare and safety of our players and the sport overall. Now, with this growth of literature since the inclusion of rugby in 2012 to the 2016 Olympics, there's also been a notable point in literature that the injury levels among men and women's cohorts can actually be seen to be somewhat similar seen in previous literature. However, at the same time, these studies note the epidemiology, as you've probably also seen in other studies in today's regional meeting. Now, the question that I bring up today is that what happens when we note these injuries, this epidemiology? Well, we must first understand that in sports medicine, injuries are not just a quantifiable number. Injuries have an effect on the players, the teams, the organizations, and overall everyone involved. This effect can spread both emotionally, physically, and financially among all those involved. Now, by financially, it's actually interesting that there is not much literature that actually quantifies the actual costs of all of these injuries that can occur among players. So therefore, the goal of our study is to take this epidemiology a step further and look at actually quantifying the medical costs of player injuries and see how these costs affect both the players and the teams. So therefore, the objective of our study is to quantify injured player medical costs sustained in USA Rugby, USAR, sanctioned Women's Rugby-7 series. Now, additionally, one thing I'd like to mention is the reason why we look into Women's Rugby-7 specifically is because the literature in Women's Rugby-7s is actually the most scarce compared to its male cohorts. Therefore, we hope to add to this literature by providing our study. Now to discuss our materials and methodology. Our goal is to provide a prospective epidemiologic study of injury encounters from USA Rugby Northeast Geographic Union qualifying series. The way we do this is that we follow what's known as the RISE report, the Rugby Injury Survey and Evaluation Methodology. So this is an injury surveillance tool that was developed by Lopez et al., published in 2012 to the American College of Sports Medicine, as one of the primary and earliest pioneering tools in American rugby injury surveillance. So given the notable literature on the RISE report, we believe that this was probably the strongest type of injury methodology in order to record these injury encounters. Additionally, once we've actually recorded the injury encounters, we take our study a step further and look at the applied epidemiology of the costs by these injuries. The way we use this is by using a standardized technique of using ICD-10, the International Classification of Disease 10 codes, and using CPT, Current Procedural Terminology coding. What these codes are is that the ICD-10 codes are used in many hospitals to actually give a standardized code of a certain diagnosis. This can be a sports injury, and this could be something pathological, and many other in variety. The CPT coding is used to actually look at the actual procedures and treatments done to that ICD-10 code. So, for example, in in a fracture, the cost associated with using an X-ray for diagnosis, for the treatment, for clinic, for any medications involved. All of those codes can usually be associated with a cost, and that is the goal of our study today, is to determine those costs using the data that we've received from the RISE methodology. So in the photo below, I give you much more of a simplified determination of using ICD-10 codes to CPT codes and to our general category. Finally, in our methodology, we have two relevant definitions, time loss and injury severity, which are primarily used in almost all rugby data worldwide. So now, using our actual methodology, what our team has discovered is that we looked at the data from 2010 to 2015. This is 6 seasons. And we looked at specifically 79 Rugby-7 tournament days between 2010 to 2015. And this was specifically in the Northeast Geographic Union, specifically the area where our ACSM chapter encompasses. Among this cohort, we determined that there was 1,084 injury encounters. And from there, we derived 249 injuries that occurred specifically among women Rugby-7 players. So among these 249 injury encounters, what we noted was the medical costs by year, by position, by body region, and other factors. But these three are the ones that we will discuss in depth today. So the medical costs by year noted that the total cost or net cost of medical treatment between these 6 seasons was a little over $44K. Among this, almost $30K was actually in new injuries, whereas the leftover $15K was in usual reoccurring injuries determined by our RISE methodology. Therefore, in addition, we noted that between 2010 to 2015, there was actually a noticeable increase in the number of injury encounters. Now, while this wasn't fully consistent, we still noticed a trend that was upward and linear in deviation. Furthermore, we looked at the medical costs associated with the positions, and what we noted is that the position types, the backs and the forwards in rugbies, among those two, backs had a notable higher total treatment costs at about $33K versus forwards at around $11K. And we found this to also be statistically significant, that the backs positions carried more of an injury burden, a financial burden from injury. Now, furthermore, we look at the actual epidemiologic portion of our study where we use ICD-10 codes. Among this, we noted that ankle sprains, concussions, and fractures were among the most frequent diagnosis coding, and this is what will lead to our information in Figure 1 and 2. Among these, the highest costs were actually fractures at around $6K and ankle sprains at around $3.7K, as shown in Figure 1 as well. Now, what we can also further derive from this information is that if you look at Figure 2, we notice that the most injury cost was usually around knee and leg injuries at $5K, followed by arm and forearm injuries, and then our ankle foot injuries and extracranial injuries. Now, we've discussed all of the injury costs and financial burdens by the frequency, by the positions, by the years, and by the body regions. So the actual discussion portion, we can look into our conclusion. And what we notice is that the average on-field total costs, disregarding surgical follow-ups, have a steady increase in the annual cost per tournaments. The actual injuries with the highest cost were actually noted to have higher severity. Therefore, for example, in a fracture, the most severe fractures actually had the more procedures done to them, therefore associated with a higher cost. Overall, our data is hopefully used to provide institutions and event managements for data with emergency preparedness and response. Finally, injury prevention in U.S. Rugby should focus on 3 things, and we've highlighted B on purpose to note that its importance. Overall, I would like to thank everyone for listening in our study today, and I wish the best of luck to all our contestants. Thank you.